welcome to Tech Week 2021. My name is John Alvin Pabellon of the Product PH community. To share more about what our community is all about, let me play you this video. So as you can see, Product PH is a professional community for people working in product management. In this group, we talk about planning, building, and launching technology products with the aim of sharing and growing our collective knowledge around product management in the Philippines. So our topic for Tech Week 2021 is about the secrets of highly effective product managers. We have basically distilled some of the lessons and insights shared by our speakers over several meetups that Product PH has organized over the last few years. But before we dive in to the topic, let me first share a short history and a brief overview of what product management is all about. To do that, let's start with this. So what you are seeing is your average grocery store aisle. So you might be wondering, what does a store aisle have anything to do with product management? Well, in a typical grocery, you will see hundreds and hundreds of products, many of them manufactured by this company. So this company's logo might be familiar to you. So P&G stands for Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble had a young executive in 1931 who basically wrote a seminal essay on the need for people who have the duties and responsibilities that in many ways is related to modern product management. In his memo, he outlined the need for what he called brand men, people who would be solely responsible for the strategy and marketing and positioning of products within Procter & Gamble. At the time, Neil Mcelroy was a young brand manager responsible for a brand of soap called Camay. And he was having difficulty marketing his product, especially with many of the resources of the company focused on other brands. So he thought if there was an internal brand champion, then the product would have more chance of winning in the marketplace. What's also interesting about this young brand manager, whose name was Neil Mcelroy, was that he would go on to eventually become the president of Procter & Gamble, and more interestingly, become the Secretary of Defense of the United States. What's also interesting about Neil was he also became a professor at Stanford University, where he would influence the thinking of two young entrepreneurs who would eventually change the technology industry, Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard. Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard are, of course, legendary in the tech industry, having started HP in their garage in the heart of Silicon Valley. Bill and Dave took to heart many of the recommendations by Neil in his essay in P&G. They set up a role within HP called the Product Manager. The Product Manager was solely responsible for leading the strategy, design, sales, and marketing of the products within HP. What's also interesting about HP was they set up the company in product divisions. So it was a product-led organization. Many have credited this design of the organization for its unprecedented growth of 20% year on year for 50 years from 1943 to 1993. Now, from 1993, let's move forward a bit to almost 20 years later in 2011, when a venture capitalist, a very well known venture capitalist whose name is Mark Andreessen, wrote another seminal essay called Software is Eating the World. In his essay in the Wall Street Journal, Mark Andreessen talks about how companies needed to transform or risk being disrupted by companies who were changing industries with their expertise in developing software. He talked about how every company needed to become a software company or risk being disrupted in this new modern digital era. Another influential essay that also came around this time was an essay by Tom Goodwin, a senior vice president at the digital agency. He talked about how Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, had no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owned no real estate. He rightly observed that something truly interesting was happening around the world. What Tom Goodwin was, of course, referring to was the wave of digital disruption that was sweeping entire industries. In his essay, he argued how the battle will now shift to control over digital interfaces, or the method by which companies would work and interact with their customers, typically by controlling the digital touchpoints that consumers have started to become more and more comfortable with, whether it's on their mobile phone or on their laptops or computers. We are seeing this play out locally as well, especially with the advent of the pandemic. In headlines and newspaper articles, we see how more and more companies are investing in wholesale digital transformation to remain competitive or just to keep themselves alive. As more and more companies embrace the need for digital transformation, so does the need for people with the right blend of experience, knowledge, and expertise to help them navigate this wholesale change in industries become more important. People with knowledge in technology, user experience, and business, and who will sit at the intersection of these three domains. I am, of course, talking about product managers. So, what is a product manager? Before we define what a product manager is, it might be good to start with what a product manager is not. Many people have asked me, what is the difference between a product manager and a project manager, a role that we more typically find in most organizations? A project manager, as the name implies, is responsible for a project. A project, by definition, is an undertaking to accomplish a goal or an outcome within a predefined period of time. A product manager, however, is responsible for a product and is responsible for a typically longer time horizon than a project. A product manager is responsible for shepherding the introduction of the product, making sure it grows, optimizing it and making sure it grows further and matures and stabilizes until it eventually, as most everything in this world, declines or dies. Now, in a typical product lifecycle, there might be multiple projects across the time horizon of a product. So it could be that there may be project managers working with product managers to ensure the success of the product across at different stages of its life cycle. Or it could be that the product manager will play the role of a project manager, shepherding and managing different projects as the product grows and matures. Now, how is a product manager different from other functional managers in an organization? A product manager is typically different from a functional manager, such as a marketing manager or sales manager or an operations manager, because of the difference in scope, authority, and responsibility. A typical product manager, instead of being responsible for just one function, typically works across multiple functions in an organization. Unlike a functional manager, uh, typically they don't have direct reports or are not managing other people. They are, however, responsible for the success of the product that they manage, and so have to work with different functions in the organization to ensure its success. Well, that sounds like the role of a general manager. So, what's the difference between a general manager and a product manager? Well, again, a product manager is different from a general manager in terms of their leadership authority and responsibility. Whereas a general manager is responsible for an entire organization and has the authority to hire and fire people, typically a product manager has to lead by influence. Because he doesn't have the same authority over people, let's say, as a general manager does, he has to be able to influence other people in order to be able to accomplish the goals he has set out for his product. So he really has to lead by influence. Okay, so we've cleared up what a product manager is not. So let's go into what a product manager is by going into what a product manager typically does in an organization. In his book, Inspired, author Marty Kagan describes the job of the product manager as to discover a product that is valuable, usable, and feasible. To provide more context, it might be useful to draw upon this framework as created by the Pragmatic Marketing Organization, which provides a standard language for the entire product team and a blueprint of the key activities needed to bring a profitable, problem-oriented product out into the market. In the Pragmatic Marketing Framework, you will see here the different activities that the product manager does, ranging from the strategic to the tactical. These activities can be broadly categorized into the technical, so doing things like technology assessment, doing competitive analysis, win-loss analysis, defining the innovation strategy for a product to ensure its continued improvement, uh, managing planning for the product by defining things like user personas, use cases, and releases. Some product managers focus more on the market side of things. So being responsible for things like program strategy, like go-to-market strategies, ensuring sales readiness, so doing sales enablement, and channel support. So ensuring the effectiveness and efficiency of the different sales channels of an organization. As a product manager goes up in an organization, then what happens is his responsibility tends to shift to the more strategic. So doing things like uh, market research, defining market problems as a whole, market sizing, assessing product performance, measuring and managing operational metrics, uh, doing things like creating a business case for a product, looking at pricing, uh, making decisions around whether to build, buy, or partner, looking after the product portfolio, managing things like product positioning, even the sales process in concert with the sales team, market requirements in concert with the marketing team, and of course, the product roadmap. Perhaps to provide more context into what a product manager is and what he does, it might be useful to cite examples. So, who are some of the well known product managers out there? Well, let's start with this man, who I'm sure all of you know. His name is Steve Jobs. And of course, you know him as the founder of Apple. But not a lot of people know that before he became the CEO of Apple in 1997, he was first vice president of new product development at Apple. So he's essentially a product manager. It was only after he was ousted during the time of CEO John Scully, and where he founded his own company again called Next, and then came back in 1997 that he became the CEO. But before that, he was responsible for new products in Apple, from which came the Macintosh line of computers. Another well-known example of an effective product manager is this woman. Her name is Marisa Mayer. Marisa Mayer is interesting because she was the 20th employee in Google and was their first female engineer. Eventually, however, she would become a product manager and then eventually become VP for consumer products. She's also well known for having started the Associate Product Management program in Google, which trained future product managers at the organization. Of course, Marisa Mayer is also well known today after becoming the CEO of Yahoo, and then eventually, after its sale to Verizon, becoming the founder of a company called Lumi Labs. So you might be wondering, all of the examples that I gave all came from abroad. Are there any examples that I can give of product managers here locally in the Philippines? Are there any well-known examples of local product managers that we can learn from? Now, before, when we ask around, the answer was very hard to find. That's actually one of the reasons why the Product PH organization was started. The Product PH organization was started by these four individuals: Yana Yanagisawa, Andreas Galster, Brian Chan, and Joshua Pelago. The four of them found that there was this dearth of resources, local resources, and people to learn from in order to start or excel in a career in product management. That is why in 2017, they formed Product PH. The four had a vision for building world-class products here in the Philippines, and they wanted to provide an open space for people interested in building great products to be able to connect with each other, share ideas with each other, and build relationships with each other. What started as a small meetup group in a cafe has quickly grown into a 2,600 person organization in a span of a few years. Here are some photos of some of the meetup activities that we have done in Product PH. Typically, we invite an expert, such as a product leader, a founder, or product manager, to share their knowledge and experience so that the rest of the community can learn. Now, going to the topic of sharing secrets of highly effective product managers, I wanted to go back to some of the more memorable talks, at least for me, of product managers, product leaders, and founders who I found to be really effective product managers locally in their own right. And what I wanted to do is to share some of the insights I was able to gain from their talks at Product PH. To start with, I want to go back to the talks of one of the original organizers of Product PH, and really one of the earliest talks we had, which was by Joshua Pilago. And he had a talk entitled "How to Build the Right Thing." Now, what struck me from that talk of his is that in order to create a great product, in order to become an effective product manager, you really had to go back and understand the problem that your product was trying to solve for. To really go deep into a problem, understand the different facets and dimensions of the problem, and find a way for your product to be able to solve that problem. I have found that many inexperienced product managers jump into a solution without really understanding and going back first to what problem they are solving for. The really good ones, however, go into the core of the problem first. Go into what job or what outcome they are trying to achieve and work their way backwards, and then designing a product that will allow the user of the product to achieve that outcome. Another talk that I also remember was a talk by David Bell, the CEO and founder of a local company by the name of Upraxis. And what's interesting about this company that they've started is they develop a lot of products, multiple products in different domains for different markets. But what's interesting about David is because he does not run out of innovative ideas, of innovative products to develop. And but what he quickly realized was, in order to be effective, he really needed to kind of focus and double down on certain things to ensure a successful outcome. So one of the things he mentioned is to be really effective. He found that he needed to be ruthless about prioritization. So it's for him and many other people like him who are very creative thinkers, it's really to come up with new ideas, and if you had the resources to launch new products. But what's harder is creating successful products. And he found over the course of running his company that in order to be successful, he had to learn to prioritize. So he, by focusing on the high priority, high impact things first, making sure that the organization was aligned with that, then you can really come up with successful products and become an effective leader. So really important um, tip from a founder, but also a highly effective product leader. So really important insight from a company leader, a CEO, uh, a product leader, a founder, that is very valuable for anyone who wants to do to do product management. So be able to prioritize. Another insightful talk that we had in Product PH was from Brian McKiernan, who actually spoke several times for us in Product PH. At the time, he was vice president of products at a fintech company. He was leading a team of product managers for a venture-backed company that was in the early stages. And one of the things he talked about was his experience getting to product market fit, which is really, if you're in an early stage company, you're in a startup, is really like one of the first really important milestones uh, for an early stage company. In his talk, he talked about really understanding the market, designing a product that really fits the needs of the market, in order to be able to find product market fit, or that point in a you know in the life cycle of a product, or really in a journey of a company, where they're able to validate that what they had built is actually meeting the needs of the market they were targeting. And so he was able to share things like, when they knew that they were able to find product market fit, the changes that need to happen uh, uh, in terms of product design and product process, and in terms of from an organizational perspective, how things needed to kind of change to be able to achieve product market fit, and what needed to change after achieving product market fit. So as a product manager, especially in an early stage company like a startup, um, you will ultimately be measured by the success of your product. And one of the early measures of success is finding that product market fit, that point in time where you have people who find value in your product, and really find that it's solving uh, the problem, a key problem, or the pain point that you had identified, and why you had built the product in the first place. So in order to do that, Brian had shared like how they needed to really understand the needs of the market, and how he led the organization to be more market focused, and really um, you know find and measure the ways by which um, their intended target market would would uh, would find their product, get awareness of the product, and find utility, and find value from the product. So very, very insightful talk. So another interesting talk that we had at Product PH was from Yang Zhang. And her talk was entitled "Pushing the Product Envelope." And at the time when she talked at Product PH, she was transitioning into a new role as managing director of a fintech company that was that's in payments. But at the time, she came from another fintech organization where she led product innovation and strategy. And in her talk, she shared how it was very important as a product manager, as a product leader, to be constantly pushing for innovation, constantly pushing the product envelope, and trying to go for, at least in my understanding, like going for the really impactful outcomes. But sometimes when you're trying to do really innovative or really new things, it can be very difficult. It can be difficult because some people might not understand what you're trying to do, or it could be just very hard. Could be very risky. So one of the things she shared was how she was able to get the buy-in of the organization, and the buy-in of her colleagues in that company she worked for, to agree with her to go on this maybe very impactful but maybe risky journey. And so she shared how it was very important to kind of build a business case for any ideas that you have, so that the organization can get behind it, can rally behind you, and to achieve that goal that you had set out. Now, earlier I talked about how as a product manager, um, you're really not managing people. You're managing a product, and but in order to to achieve the goals that you want for your product, you have to work with people. You have to be able to lead by influence. And one of the ways you can do that is by creating a solid rationale for why people should follow you, should do what you've set out. Should to get buy-in for your ideas, especially for those that can be quite risky or quite be bold, can be quite bold. And so, Yang Yang had shared one of the things that had served her well, which was creating like a business case for her ideas. And really, it's all about being strategic, being a strategic thinker. Thinking about the impact of what you're trying to do, getting people to understand what the vision that you have, what you're trying to the outcome that you're trying to achieve, getting people to kind of buy into it, get their support, so that they can rally behind you. And it's really having really a strategic mindset. And that's really what I found interesting from Yang Yang's talk. The other talk that we had in Product PH, and is really something that centered around one of the key skills that an effective product manager should have. And this is something that I shared myself, from drawing from my own experience as a product manager. And really, it was all about how to say no. Um, so one of the things I had worked in a very large software company, and I had to work with a lot of stakeholders, multiple stakeholders, many of them in many different countries, in a variety of roles and functions. And many of them, um, you know, was because we were a software product company. Many of them, um, felt that their success was really tied into the success of the product, and so they had a lot of ideas, on what the product should do and should have for us to be able to sell more, or for us to succeed in the marketplace, to win against our competitors, to enter a new market, and so on. Now, often these points of view may conflict or may detract you from the important goals of the organization, or can be valuable, but maybe not yet timely for the organization from a resource standpoint, or from a timing standpoint. So, one of the things I learned very early as a product manager, to be an effective product manager, is really just to learn the skill of saying no. Now, the importance of saying no all boils down to focus, and the importance of focus. To quote Steve Jobs, people think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on. But he said that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that are out there. He says you have to be effective, you really have to pick carefully. He said he's actually proud of the things that Apple hasn't done than the things that they have done, because saying no to the 100 other things had allowed them to focus on that one good thing that had allowed them to make insanely great products, and therefore ultimately become an insanely great company. So really important, I think, and closely tied to being strategic, and ruthlessly prioritizing. Another very, very interesting talk that we had in Product PH was from Bit Santos. So at the time, Bit Santos was the CTO of a very well known company in e-commerce called OLX. Of course now he's in venture capital, but um, he he had shared about the lessons he learned while building products at OLX. So at the time he was the CTO. And one of the things that he mentioned in his talk was, as an organization, as because he was leading an entire product development organization, oftentimes they would get pulled into different directions, right? And and for him, it was important to kind of understand why they were doing something, to have a a firm grasp of why they were doing something, right? And um, have a true north star, right? Have a clear guide on what they were trying to achieve. Because as the company grew and as they got pulled into different strategic directions, um, um, it was important that they stayed true to the vision that they had, to the mission that they had within the company. Um, and it was also important that to be able to communicate that to his team, to be able to, as a leader, to be able to provide that that constant, that thing that um, kept the team and the organization stable, even in the midst of great instability. So I thought that was really, really interesting. What was also interesting about Bitstock was even though there were, certain constants like the whys, um, and the house, he mentioned how culture is very important in giving guidance on how they would do things, and the importance of actively managing and shaping the culture in the organization. That didn't mean that, that things don't change. He went on to share a little bit about, the company's journey from an independent company to something that was owned by a global multinational, and how they had to also adapt and change over time as well, and how their processes and how they did things also had to change as the organization as a whole had to change. But the main takeaway that I got from that talk was how, as a product leader, um, you have to be able to provide that leadership for your team in order to become effective. So to actively, share share the vision, share the mission, share the whys. Why are we doing this? What's the importance of the thing that they're doing? And also actively manage and shape the culture, and also prepare the organization for change, because change does happen all the time. So really, what I was really impressed by the leadership that Bit had to do to become effective in his role at OLX. And finally, we also had this very, very interesting talk from Angela Obayos Tubian, um, who is fairly well known in the user experience community. She came from a design leadership role from a media company in ABS-CBN. She's now head of product design at a major bank. But one of the things she talked about in one of the product page sessions was the importance of being user-centered, right? That behind the analytics and the data that you measure and you tend to focus on as a product manager, that there are real people using your product, and to be thoughtful out of how your product affects them. And so that was, I think, a really powerful statement. And she talked about, having empathy, really having empathy for your users and understanding, you know the pains, the pains that they have, the problems that you're trying to solve for them, and really being aware of how your product can affect them, um, you know and being conscious of maybe unintended consequences of how you design your product. um, so it's really having a like a user focused or user centered approach to building product. So from Angela's talk, I really learned about how to become effective as a product manager. Um, you you really have to keep the needs of your users at the center. Um, it should really start with understanding who they are, going out.